critical race theory, the 1619 Project, and the crusade against American history is toxic propaganda.
That's about to happen to this young priest. He's about to get caught in the middle of the cosmic slop.
Now is not the time for trickery and tomfoolery.
I like to begin by...
So when you take out the trash, think about what else needs to go with it.
I'm out of here.
That's the thing that makes this program possible. The First Amendment, which allows freedom of speech. If one believes that is not the right answer, then one has to be one of the most anti-German racists that can be. If one believes that the German people would have tolerated the concentration camps and the gas chambers, if news media, like the programs that Mr. Brown is setting on, if those people were willing to bring discordant views out into the open, I don't believe the concentration camps and the gas chambers could have continued to exist in Germany.
The proposition that America is institutionally racist requires that something creates an environment.
What the lesson of Nazi history we have in this country, and it will protect us.
Two things create an environment for slavery or racism, and they are needed for it to exist.
My research leads me inescapably to the opinion that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary.
One is a social contract, as in the South during slavery.
And racially genetic in origin.
Two, codified law.
And thus not remediable to a major degree by practical improvements in environment.
You must address the foundation and the factors. Education, a family structure.
It's evidence for a genetic difference, in my
Well, you see what I'm saying? There might be many, many more genetic differences where people of color appear superior.
In the 1960s, 80+% of blacks were two-parent homes. Today, that is reversed completely the other way. It has a lot of factors, which includes entitlement systems, the growth of liberalism to a point of progressivism beyond any imagined course.
I'd like to comment because I'd like to say that I don't think that there's a major difference between what Dr. Shackley is doing. I don't think that Dr. Shackley is fully aware of what he is doing and why he is doing what he's doing. But the long-range implications of what he is doing are no different than the propaganda campaign that Hitler and his Nazi unit carried on in Germany that ended up eliminating 6 million Jewish people. Now, what is most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans. Number two, he was aware that the Semites had genetically dominant material, genetic material to the Aryans. And if we begin to understand the way that people who were in Europe at the time that the Semites arrived from Africa, when the Semites arrived in Europe from Africa, they were people who had substantial amounts of color and who had very kinky hair because they were from the continent of Africa. And the Europeans, the white people who were there, had a reaction, a color reaction to the Semites that is no different than the reaction and the concern on the part of people who are white in this area of the world or any other area of the world to people who have the genetic capacity to produce color, who can genetically annihilate their position. And I think it's very, very important. Even though Dr. Shackley, I am convinced that Dr. Shackley believes that he is perhaps elevating science with all of his charts and all of his figures, but he doesn't understand the things that propel him as a white individual in a social system that has programmed him throughout his life and programmed large numbers of people like him to focus on the genetics of people of color in such a way as to destroy people of color.
And when it comes to single parentage of anyone of any ethnicity, a single mother has a higher likelihood significantly of being in poverty, therefore raising a child in poverty. I'm addressing foundation because it is easy to argue, as my colleagues have, the emotion.
Well, there are enormous differences. In fact, the lesson to be learned from Nazi history is frequently very misunderstood. And it is a lesson which Mr. Brown has told us about earlier. It's the First Amendment. It's not that eugenics is intolerable. Actually, the eugenic programs, which are the opposite of dysgenics, eugenic programs are not inconceivable, they're not inhumane. Denmark has been carrying out programs with strong eugenic implications for maybe 30 years. And it's important to note that since World War II, Denmark's per capita homicide rate dropped and is now approximately 1/20th. That is, the number of deaths of probability of being killed in a year by a violent homicide is roughly, the order of 100 times less for young Danes than it is for young American blacks.
Give me my damn freedom or kill me.
That the American Negro is either going to be free or he's going to be dead.
We're going to be free. Now, you kill all you want to, but we kill too.
What the hell do you think we care about dying if you're going to deny us the right to live? We want agreement by which we can live or die. You choose.
As you know, Mr. President, I have been a lifelong card-carrying Republican. And yet I was always a good soldier for the party. I sincerely believed, and still believe, that black people need to learn how to stand on their own 2 feet without the crutches of governmental legislation. But I'm afraid I must protest in the strongest terms possible what I've heard in this room today. What is being proposed cannot be passed off euphemistically as
dysgenics.
At its best, it is group banishment. At its worst, it is utter and complete extermination.
Italy, for example, they came to the brink of Euro-communism and backed off. In France, they had a socialist government and backed away from it. I don't think you can fool the people anymore the way you could in the 30s in an industrial civilized society by saying, you know, we want socialism because we don't want to promise you pie in the sky. We want to make you rich here on earth, and socialism is the way to make you rich. That was the original promise of socialism. Money, food, shelter, work, but, you know, a good job and rewarding income. Now, that's just, you know, been completely disproved by, quote, historical analysis, by facts. And the only place you can get away with it now is with people who aren't that well educated. Now, I hope that's not taken as an ad hominem. That's my hypothesis as to, you know, why it is that it is not possible to spread true socialism in an advanced society.
Will they be ready for democracy when they stop eating each other?
You were concerned about the process. I think we got to understand that there's no such thing as objective truth, which is implicit in everything Dr. Clark says. That white people use the institutions to accomplish white purpose. The white purpose is to maintain a power position and keep everybody else in a subordinate, powerless kind of position. Now that's the institution's purpose, and that's the way it functions and how it functions. And we got to realize then that everything that the schools teach is designed to fit into that purpose.
Right. I think that people are completely misinformed about how the flag was, like what the flag, like what it's, like how the war started. It's kind of evolved into like a racial thing when really it was not started as a racial thing at all. And I think that like it should absolutely be flown, like, like publicly.
Any other opinions as far as agreeing with him or disagreeing with him? Okay, Mr. Justice.
People who are against the flag are against it for 2 reasons. The big one, the slavery racism thing. And the second, the lesser, it's a flag that represents treason. Arguably, 2 pretty good reasons to dislike it.
You do have a right to fly it. I do not think it should be flown on public property, like in front of a state house. You can also fly it at protests. But he mentioned misconceptions. There are no misconceptions about that flag.
See, what I'm stressing is that you guys are misinformed about the flag's like origins. You're saying that it's racist, but the flag is not a racist thing. It's been molded by our society to be looked at as a racist thing, when really it's not.
Okay, so I...
Okay.
And if you want to go to the person who would have the best read on what the flag meant, how about the person who created the flag? And what he had to say was, as a people, we are fighting to maintain the heaven-ordained supremacy of the white man over the inferior or colored race. If we ain't fighting to keep slavery, then what the hell are we fighting for? There is no question about what the Civil War was about.
I do not agree with that at all.
And your reason why he has a right to disagree. And I probably wouldn't. I probably wouldn't be teaching you if the South would have won. I'd probably be chilling somewhere else. All right.
Can I have like 3 examples of what else the Civil War was about that was not slavery?
Disagree, but it was completely a war on Northern aggression. North was making unconstitutional and unfair taxes on the South to promote Northern manufacturers, because the South's main export was cotton. The Britain manufacturers were like doing better than the North, and so they were selling their goods cheaper here in the U.S. So the North had 5 times more population than the South, so all political votes would go in favor of the North, obviously. And so they voted to put a tariff, like the tariff of 1825 by John Quincy Adams. And that tariff put taxes and made promoted the northern industries while also degrading the southern economies, which is unfair. And they didn't want unconstitutional and unfair treatment, so that's why the South decided to leave.
So let's talk about it. In 1619, there were 20 human beings that were brought to America as slaves. 20. And it all started from that. Because what people figured out very quickly is, if you have free labor, the profits that you can make go up exponentially. The first slave ship is built in Massachusetts, not in the South. So this whole thing about, well, it was the bad South and the good North when it came to slavery. No, no, no. America went in all hands on deck. And I'm asking you to look at these laws because these laws will help you understand what slavery was about. What we have here is, we know the white slave owners will be raping the black women, but their kids are not going to be free. Let's make that clear right here and right now. We're going to steal their God from them, but even if they accept our God, they're still slaves. When you look at that one, and I think about policing in America today, it sends chills up and down my spine. And look at what you can get executed for. Growing your own food, learning to read, and assembling in groups. I remember talking to my great-grandmother, who was born to parents that were slaves. And I remember her saying, we had to be very careful not to show how smart we really were, because a smart black person was a threat. 40 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence owned other human beings. The founding fathers of America had absolutely, positively no problem with white supremacy. They believed in it. It was the truth. It was the reality of their time. And they weren't embarrassed to say it.
Most human beings I know are quite capable of denial and hypocrisy. And
Take it to day one. Say, yeah, these guys brought the slaves here. Hell, they even brought us here. Why are they allowed to be proud of their history? Why are they allowed to be proud of their flag? What does this flag mean to the Irish, to Indian people, to many African countries? Oh, sure, some might say colonialism was about commerce and not racism. Say, yeah, but racism sure helped.
One of the main reasons that Native Americans were driven off their ancestral land, the plantation owners had to have room. If you're going to grow cotton and tobacco, you need a lot of land. 13% of the entire American population was enslaved by 1860. Can I see a show of hands? How many people understood that slavery was that pervasive? And maybe some, and that's good, but you know what? I guarantee if you knew that, you didn't learn it in high school, and you didn't learn it in college. You learned that somewhere else. This is not taught to us.
And he said that the teachers are completely biased, and he told me the real story. And so do you think that what you've heard in the history classrooms at Shawnee Mission East are a little bit skewed from what really happened.
Okay, no, because like I asked you, and if you know.
But do you know what really happened?
If I know, I asked you to tell me what really happened. I asked you if that the Civil War started beside slavery, and you couldn't do it. You just looked at me. So please tell me the whole story.
I'll give a rundown again if you want. You want me to?
Yeah.
Oh God, here we go. All right, so.
To understand the economic dependency on slavery. And so when I talk about the monuments and the Civil War and the things that are behind this, one of the other things I would just encourage you to do, like any other investigation that you would do, follow the money. To understand what the motivation is, just follow the money.
Northern manufacturers, right?
Go ahead.
All right, so Britain was selling their goods in America for lower prices than the North was, right?
Okay.
So the North had 5 times more population than the South. South's main exporter was cotton and tobacco. And so the South would make most of their money off shipping their cotton to Britain. And the North manufacturers, they made the tariff of 1825, which put a import and export tax on cotton, which would raise prices of northern goods, but it would hurt the southern economy because they would then tax the cotton that goes out to Britain. It was unconstitutional and unfair.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
You said the 2 major crops were what?
Cotton and tobacco.
And how did they harvest them at a high level without prices being attached? Like, what was their main way of harvesting them?
Probably slavery. The cotton gin was.
How much did they pay the slaves? I'm just asking the question. I mean, if their main 2 crops were cotton and tobacco, and they used free labor, so they made a lot of profit off of it. This is just economics. Then how do you take out the fact that slavery was attached?
All right. Well, I have a question for Mr. Justice then.
You brought up an economics debate. Your argument was economics. If they made the majority of their profit off of free labor to be able to send out that cotton and that tobacco to everybody at a cheaper price and make a lot of profit because they don't have to pay the labor, then how can you detach the labor that did it?
People may think, well, I have an understanding that slavery was somehow directly tied to cotton production, and cotton production was kind of important. I want to ask you to think about that in some different terms. And before we do that, let's talk about Andrew Jackson, who was the architect of the Indian Removal Act. And our president, once again, we talk about rewriting history. You can't diss Andrew Jackson. King Cotton, the theory that was used by Southerners before the Civil War to say, we can do this. We can break away from the North and it's economically feasible. And here's why. Everybody depends on our cotton. We can shut down the mills in the North in a heartbeat. Britain and France are going to have to make a decision. Will they support us militarily? Because we can cut down their mills. We just won't send them our cotton. It couldn't have been more practically and beautifully stated than it was by Senator Henry Hammond of South Carolina. Without firing a gun, without drawing a sword, should they make war on us, we could bring the whole world to our feet. What would happen if no cotton was furnished for 3 years? England would topple headlong and carry the whole civilized world with her, save the South. No, you dare not make war on cotton. No power on earth dares to make war upon it, because cotton is king. Follow the money. This is how important cotton was. What kind of money are we talking about? 1840, cotton made 59% of all U.S. exports. This is 15 years before the Civil War. 1.5 million pounds with about 700,000 slaves, and you can see how that changed. 2.25 billion pounds and almost 4 million slaves. This is what made America wealthy. This was the formation of wealth. And folks, I just want to make sure as a side note to say, I hope you don't think that the money made from slavery just dissolved and went up into the air. It went into companies and businesses, and not even tracing and blaming those corporations. Those corporations hired people and paid their salaries and their benefits and gave them the ability to raise families and to pass wealth on through the generations. This money is what made America financially stable. The market value of slaves in 1860 was greater than the market value of every railroad, factory, and bank combined. Follow the money, because the money we're talking about was huge.